It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and Bashir is preparing to leave for yet another conference. Maybe anyway, as O'Brien's dislocated his shoulder kayaking, despite Bashir telling him to knock it off while a previous injury heals. Bashir's not going to let that stop him from getting away though, and after popping it back in again, tells O'Brien to consult a nurse if he has any problems. Perhaps he needs the break, as when his alarm goes off the following morning, he's still bleary-eyed and struggles to believe he's had a proper kip. A shame really, as if Sisko calling all the senior officers to ops is any indication, he won't be getting that holiday after all. The good news is it's not a Dominion attack. The bad news is it's an investigation by Internal Affairs, and Deputy Director Sloan here has been tasked with finding a potential traitor on Deep Space Nine. That's why they're all going to be confined to quarters for the foreseeable future, while Sloan gets to the bottom of things. At least that means Bashir can have a rest. That's all he can have though, as his replicator isn't working when he tries to order breakfast. There wouldn't have been time to eat it anyway, as when he starts to unpack from his aborted holiday, security arrives to take him to Sloan. The expected interrogation is more of an informal chat. Sloan asks him about his kidnapping by the Dominion, one that happened on the way to another conference, and the time he spent working with other genetically altered humans. It's as short as it is pleasant, and Sloan sends him back to his quarters after telling him the replicators were taken offline to prevent making communications devices, which seems odd when Bashir's wearing one, but let's ignore that for now. Regardless, Sloan says he'll have Bashir's breakfast sent to him. Bashir gets a breakfast, but not the one he ordered. Worf's gagh is very fresh indeed, so Bashir decides he's not that hungry after all. Instead, he goes back to waiting on his sofa, where he notices some tablets he'd already removed from his bag are now back in it, and other items have been moved as well. A call from O'Brien doesn't help the sense of unease, not least of which because he's not supposed to be in contact. O'Brien's interview was significantly less pleasant than Bashir's, and the couple of hours he spent there focused on a single thing, Dr. Julian Bashir. And it looks like Sloan has decided he wants more information direct from the source, as he sent both of his guards to collect Bashir for another little chat. This interview is significantly less pleasant, though it's not difficult to see things from Sloan's point of view. Some things about Bashir's time on a Dominion Alcatraz droid don't add up, like how he was in solitary for 5 days, but Martok, husband of Sorella, says he was gone for 7, or how they escaped because the Dominion left a Starfleet mega shuttle in orbit, unattended and powered up, one they contacted by building a transmitter using equipment that just happened to be accessible in a crawl space. That's why he thinks Bashir is working for them, though not necessarily voluntarily. He thinks this is some Manchurian candidate shit Bashir programmed with commands and let loose until activated. A spy who doesn't know he's a spy is excellent cover. Bashir's taken to Odo's office very publicly along the promenade. A part of that is likely because Odo's not the one giving security orders right now, and the people doing the job had friends who died in Dominion attacks. Sisko's not tolerating the Gestapo shit and demands to see Bashir, something not even the heavy-handed guards can stop. He's come with news. The guards aren't the only ones who lost people. Sloan had a son who was killed in an ambush and suspects Bashir's involvement. Speaking of whom, Sloan himself arrives during the exchange and admits this is the case. He's also choosing to see a blatant conflict of interests as a great motivator for finding who was responsible. Trying to steamroll a Sisko out of the conversation backfires when he instead asserts his command of the station and insists on being present for all interrogations going forward. He's there the following day when Sloan's having another go. You've got to admit that things don't look great on the surface. Bashir tried to cure the Jem'Hadar of Ketracel White addiction at one point, for example. Then those genetically altered humans he invited here were given access to top-secret data, only to conclude that we should surrender. And why should anybody listen to his denials at all? His entire Starfleet career was built on the back of a lie, one he'd still be hiding if others hadn't discovered the secret of his genetic tinkering by accident. A man who spends decades hiding the truth abandons any right to be taken at his word. Back in the holding cell, Sisko's wavering, not about Bashir's intent, but about the possibility of him being a sleeper agent. It is medically achievable after all, and his suspicion isn't helped by Bashir refusing to even consider it. Such a reaction isn't what you'd expect from a doctor and a scientist, but it would make sense in a programmed spy. Sloan has decided to change the game. Sisko's interference is proving a pain in the bollocks, so he's taking Bashir to a starbase. Perhaps they'll even let him out again once the war is over. Somebody has other plans. When the force field of his holding cell is lowered, Bashir is teleported away. The somebody in charge of that teleporting is Fifth Uncle Wayoon the Creepy, and he greets Bashir like an old friend. Why wouldn't he? Bashir is a Dominion agent, after all. Bashir's denials are pushed away. They've retrieved him for debriefing a few times now, and the initial acceptance is always a struggle, he says. Once the mental block has been defeated, he'll remember how he was convinced back during his incarceration that this war is one the Dominion simply cannot lose. Sometimes the senses can help jog things along, he says. That's why Fifth Uncle Wayoon has arranged to provide Bashir with the same meal he was given during his recruitment, the breakfast he tried to order from his replicator earlier. Bashir's still not buying it, but has started to wonder why both Fifth Uncle Wayoon the Creepy and Deputy Director Sloan would both want him to believe the same story. The only answer he can think of is that Sloan is the real Dominion spy. We'll have to put that on hold as the Defiant has caught up and wishes to register a complaint. It comes in the form of kabooms, and Fifth Uncle Wayoon makes himself scarce. Another kaboom knocks the Cardigan guard and Bashir's stunt double onto the floor, just as Worf and Kira teleport aboard. The guard gets double pooped, and they grab Bashir before teleporting away. A slight problem, it's not exactly a rescue. To be fair, Bashir being nabbed by the Dominion looks bloody awful. Hardly surprising, then, that nobody believes his claims of innocence. O'Brien pushing him away is the hardest blow of all, though a very curious one given his recent shoulder injury. Bashir asks him how it could be all right after he hurt it playing spring ball, but O'Brien says it's healed. O'Brien not knowing that he injured it kayaking instead of playing a game is enough for Bashir to call bullshit and say this whole thing is fake. Sloan seems to agree the jig is up, which is why he turns off the Hollow program we've been in all along. Sloan also now seems to agree that Bashir isn't a plant, but wants to be sure via a gizmo behind his ear, one that's been recording his brainial responses during this whole exercise. Whatever it logged seems to convince Sloan, despite the simulation being forced to an early end because Bashir rumbled it. Not a bad performance for somebody operating on only a single hour of sleep, Bashir having been taken during the night when they stuck him in here. Not to worry though, as it's not technically a kidnapping. Sloan works for Starfleet just like Bashir, only for an unknown part of the intelligence branch called Section 31. Being an independent organization means they deal with threats in ways other parts of Starfleet can't, which is what they've been doing for a good couple of 100 years, ever since Starfleet was founded. Protecting Utopia by occasionally violating its principles isn't for everyone, though. It takes a rare breed. Specifically, it takes someone like Bashir. Him balking at the idea of breaking rules to achieve an end rings somewhat hollow when Sloan points out that's exactly what he did when he joined Starfleet despite being genetically augmented. The people he's saved since are a direct result of that broken rule, which is just like what Sloan and Section 31 do. Bashir turns him down anyway, but Sloan tells him to give it some thought after he's caught up on his sleep. We're in Sisko's office and talking about Bashir's abduction. Bashir wasn't missed due to the conference, and Sloan left no evidence of how he was abducted. Obviously, Deputy Director Sloan doesn't exist, at least not officially. Inquiries about Section 31 are being met with a very non-committal shrug, which isn't the same thing as a denial. That doesn't leave us with many ways of finding out more, but then we don't really need them. Sloan told Bashir to think about it, which means he'll be back. And when he comes, Sisko wants Bashir to accept the job offer, so we'll leave him to consider how the realities of being a spy measure up to his fantasies until the next adventure. A spy story for Bashir then, only a genuine one this time. No legally distinct fake Bond in a holosuite, but rather a thoroughly unpleasant encounter with the real thing, albeit still in a holo program. Perhaps that last point is even a subtle nod to the idea that, just as in fantasy, the reality of espionage is also peddling fiction. It's not a bad premise either. Discovering Bashir lied to Starfleet for his entire career is bound to have raised some red flags further up the line, even if his dad managed to reach a deal with someone sympathetic. A further investigation into his conduct is the logical endpoint of such a revelation, and being right at the forefront of Dominion activity is guaranteed to have created enough ammunition to warrant looking deeper. Past actions are only innocuous until somebody is trying to find reasons. After that, they're quickly reclassified as circumstantial evidence. Most importantly for this episode, though, we introduced the concept of Section 31, and a very controversial idea it was too. The Federation is a utopia after all, and people with morals don't use black ops organizations. Why, something like that would be as bad as, I don't know, a Starfleet captain deliberately poisoning an entire planet, for example. Preposterous. Trek itself has spent time establishing what complete and utter bastards groups like the Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order are. It was only a few seasons back that we showed both of them trotting off to do a bit of the old genocide against the Founders, a failed attempt which essentially gutted the Obsidian Order. To then admit that the Alpha Quadrant's Golden Boys have something similar makes for a troubling comparison. But is that conclusion naive? Odo's not at all surprised by their existence. If everybody else has them, then to not have one yourself is to be at a distinct disadvantage. You don't make a federation that lasts hundreds of years by hoping the other guy will be as ethical as you are. Besides, just because we have a Black Ops unit doesn't mean we'd necessarily go to the same extremes as others, does it? It's not like we'd follow the Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order in trying to do a genocide, right? Right? And that's the real sticking point. You can argue that countering a threat requires understanding the threat, and I'd argue there's some sound logical reasoning behind that, but what keeps a completely autonomous unit from continuing to serve the system which created it? The founders of the Federation understood politics enough to realize that placing carte blanche power in the hands of those who'd actively seek it requires only a single bad actor to usurp the whole thing. We've seen what happens in our own time when there are insufficient or unenforced restrictions on leaders. Now imagine them inheriting an unquestioning space Gestapo along with their position. The counterpoint, of course, is that Section 31, being entirely independent, is essentially the same deal, just without the voting. There's no oversight of who gets recruited beyond people who are already there, which is the same system used by cults. There's a fair argument to be made that actively seeking out people for such jobs rather than accepting applications is a better way to screen out powermongers. Again, though, that only requires a single bad actor to usurp the whole thing. How do we know that Section 31 didn't fall to this during the very first round of recruitment, and now only continue to keep the Federation safe as a means of ensuring their own power? Even worse, is it possible those who founded Starfleet and created Section 31 foresaw this very eventuality, and still considered it a fair price to pay for their utopia? That's enough of that, so let's mop up a couple of other bits. Firstly, there's the observation that, for a super stealthy, doesn't officially exist section of Starfleet, you'd expect them to be a bit more subtle than having regulations sideburns. Okay, it's not as obvious as wearing a ruddy great badge announcing to all and sundry that you're part of a Black Ops team, but it's still not great on the plausible deniability front, is it? Secondly, I find it a little hard to believe that Bashir's disappearance wasn't noticed. Odo strikes me as the sort of person who'd check the departure manifests as a matter of course, so the lack of Bashir's name would have set off alarms. This, too, is a relatively minor quibble. It's not too difficult to headcanon our way out of it, as I suppose Sloan could have arranged a replacement or just doctored the record. Lastly, there's another quote I'd like to highlight. It feels like I've been calling out lines from episodes quite a lot of late, but I want to end today with another from Bashir because it made me smile. When push comes to shove, are we willing to sacrifice our principles in order to survive? This is either a particularly delightful piece of foreshadowing, or a very fortunate coincidence indeed. End of episode.
I know this isn't technically real, and the whole respawn thing means we can't actually die, but should we start thinking about arming ourselves?
It's getting a bit grim, isn't it? But we've still not actually seen a threat.
The search engine crash we were in felt pretty threatening.
How would weapons have stopped that?
Okay, what about those buzzards? They were dicks to us.
Aye, but they didn't actually attack.
All I'm saying is I'd feel more comfortable with something to defend myself.
Would you though?
What's that supposed to mean?
It means, would you actually feel safer relying on anything you found here? Everything we've seen so far has been buggered or hostile. Who's to say the piece of lead piping you try to swing won't turn into a snake and bite your balls or some shite?
Great, now you've given me another thing to worry about. Woof.